Hello, and I am here today, coming to you on November 7th, shortly after a very, very historic election with I'd say two old friends, but one friend definitely older in time than the other. I have Fritz Imperial, who is a perennial guest on this channel, and people will certainly remember from the early era of, I don't know what we want to call it, reactionary YouTube. And then we have Jay Burden, also prominent interviewer. This is always the strange thing about you, Jay Burden, is that, we watch each other's show. So it feels like I've talked to you a lot, but I only think we've done a few podcasts together. So
no, definitely. And that's why it was a pleasure to get to meet you in meet space, so to speak.
Yes.
Over the weekend, which we've done before.
We've done that too. We've had more meetings in MeetSpace than we have had.
Well, here's the thing:
podcast crossovers.
Every other one has been in a room of 200 people, all of whom wanted to talk to you and/or me. Yeah. So it became impossible for the two of us to stand next to each other. It was like magnets repelling. And so this was a smaller event, and you and I actually got to speak, which is a very long way of saying thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to speaking to you.
Excellent. Yeah. And Fritz, I don't think you said hello, but we were actually planning on doing a kind of we usually do once a year kind of discussion of cultural issues.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's nice when we have a specific topic to talk about, and I do have something that I did in real life that will actually pertain to this, because I know you guys just met up in which city on the West Coast?
Let's say Portland. It was outlying area, but that general region, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's
over here on the East, I had the pleasure of attending the OGC Delaware Crossing chapters meetup at Valley Forge, which wasn't quite what they advertised, because they advertised it as wintering at Valley Forge, but it was about in the 60s and sunny all day, so not quite that, but a very pleasant day there. Beautiful park, by the way.
Yeah, I actually never have been there, so that's quite interesting. At any rate, we are here not to talk about various in real life events, but to talk about the auspicious election that just occurred, where Donald Trump, I guess this was projected, he was the projected victor in the polls. But whatever kind of weird anomalies were going on in 2020 that allowed the Democrats to pull off a huge electoral success in the face of polls immediately before the election that did not occur in 2024. 2024 looked remarkably similar to how American elections have played out in years past. And Trump retook the presidency, one of the few men in American history to serve non-consecutive terms as president, and overcoming broad social media censorship, 2 assassination attempts, and a felony conviction, all orchestrated by his enemies to keep him from this moment. Thoughts?
I mean, I thought he was probably going to win. I gave him about a 55 to 45 chance of winning. I didn't think he would win the popular vote, but that was a pretty nice surprise, because that definitely gives him the mandate. I think you've made the point that it destroys the narrative that he's a threat to democracy, because, well, he got the popular vote and they can't really contest that. And hopefully it looks like the transition, at least so far, is going to be relatively smooth, considering that Harris, congratulated him. Everybody's kind of accepted the defeat. Doesn't seem like it's going to drag on. I mean, you do have people saying, "Oh, Trump cheated," or "We want to recount," but you're going to have that in every election. So,
well, the popular vote is significant because it's so narratively disruptive for the hard left. This has been sort of the bane of the democratic socialist people, because now they're confronting the fact that Trump has a popular mandate, so that they either kind of concede moral authority to him, or they reveal themselves to be not driven by democratic impulses, which is, I mean, everyone already knew this. People knew this from Viktor Orban and a variety of other politicians that have broadly obtained majorities in their own country, but have been anathema to the left. But it's just fun to see bread tube kind of running and kind of hiding away. That's what you notice about leftists, is that, I mean, there's a certain number of theater kids that they'll cry no matter what. They've joined the left because they want an excuse to cry. But for the most part, leftists, when they lose, they get really quiet. And there's sort of been this quietness coming from at least the radical side of the left.
Well, I want to open up a question, right, for both you and Fritz, excuse me, which is, who do you think will be the whipping boy, right? Who will be the designated reason we lost? I've seen some which is saying, which is always the case, Kamala is too moderate. I've heard some people blaming white women or young men, which is another demographic that shifted hard for Trump. But I'm curious, what do you guys see as being the kind of post-mortem?
I'll go first. So, I mean, I think that the Democrats kind of resigned themselves to lose this election about months ago or 2 months ago. And, I originally gave the Kamala the chance to win, and then I revised it to 50-50 when I saw all these elite blue state people switching over to either being Trump or not endorsing Kamala, which was an indication that the mainstay of elite opinion was fine with her losing, which, if people didn't care if Kamala lost, then she would lose. But this is, I think, an open contest. There aren't very many people that the Democrats can go after. What they're going to try to do is they're going to blame it on particular people. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will be like the main whipping boy. I think he's there to lose. He's there to be the big knucklehead that people blame things on. So he'll be an obvious whipping boy. They'll want to throw Kamala under the bus. I think her career is over. But they're going to try to supremely personalize this, because what are they going to do? They're going to, like, what? I guess they could go after white people more. I mean, that's their standard playbook, right? But it doesn't look good, I guess, and it also seems to open up when they're sort of the mood among blue state elites is that identity politics went too far, and that's been the mood among blue state elites since let's not mince words here, since October 7th. That's when a large amount of the moneyed power inside the Democratic coalition started feeling really bad about all this anti-white stuff and decided to pull back. So it's not a good look to just go after white men and white women. So their options for throwing people under the bus are really quite limited. The other option is people maybe they'll try to throw transgenderism under the bus. That doesn't work, right? They're an ascendant coalition. The Democratic Party never does that. So my guess is they're going to completely make this a personal issue and an issue about how to, they're going to frame this as an inappropriate read on how to appeal to people. It's going to be a marketing failure and a personal failure of the particular people who lost this election for the Democratic Party. Or the Democrat Party.
I mean, I think it's going to break among the two different classes, the activist and the elite class, and the donor class of the left. The activist class is probably going to just continue to up the hatred against white people and men in particular. I mean, you've seen them doing that on their meltdowns on TikTok and on CNN and MSNBC already. And I think the elite class, the clear heads, are going to see, at least if they're smart, are going to try and do a lot of internal restructuring, and maybe they'll put the woke away in some aspects, but it remains to be seen how much they could actually do that and how much they could actually try and right the ship. Because right now they're in, I think, a large state of disarray.
I think that, Dave, your point about the early signaling from Democratic elite is apt. There were a couple things I noticed, which is, one, obviously, shall we say, the great degree to which it seems like Biden, deliberately or not, sabotaged the Harris campaign, right? To a certain degree by just putting her in a bad situation, but also by continually saying things that presented her in a bad light. But also, and let's be honest, that might just be dementia.
That could be a mistake.
But you have other prominent Democrats, like Bill Clinton, right, who basically said Lincoln Riley would still be alive if we had my border policy, in endorsing Harris. which is, not a particular, or shortly afterwards, I believe, which is not a particularly nice thing to say about someone you want to win an election. But I think the easiest example to that is effectively the fact that Trump was allowed to win very, very quickly, right? This was not a prolonged affair. When it was done, which indicates that there's at least some faction in power that basically said, yeah, we're giving it to the Donald.
Yeah, I mean, and this was the big difference between now and 2016. Are there actually emerging elite coalitions behind Trump? The neocons, like the classic Trotskyist neocons, are kind of on the outs. Like the Irving Kristals, was Irving Kristol still alive? Bill Kristol certainly is alive, and the anti-Trump camp. All of these classic neocons, the Cheneys, these guys have all jumped ship on the Republican Party, but there's a new crop of neocon aligned foreign policy people that are, I hate mincing words, that are broadly aligned around our alliances to Ukraine and Israel, and want to make those a centerpiece of American government, at least on the international stage. Those people are very much represented in the Trump coalition. In fact, wasn't one of the early nominations for Trump's transition team at State Department one of these sort of neocon aligned people. And then in addition to that, Trump has pulled in an additional new elite, or another group of new elites, which are the Silicon Valley PayPal mafia style people. And that's sort of a real wild card in this entire equation. They're obviously jumping ship from the Democrat coalition. They're looking for representation inside this new Trump thing that's forming up. I don't trust these people either. I don't trust either of the groups. And then, of course, the third coalition are, I don't know, what could be broadly considered true right-wingers or paleocons, which we sort of represent. And I don't know. I think there isn't really an elite that represents that third stool of Trump's ruling coalition that is an elite itself. I mean, people are kind of trying to put it together. You have got the Claremont Institute and the variety of organizations that we're involved with. But in all likelihood, the neocons and the PayPal mafia are going to come out swinging. And they're going to try to define this election as the thing that validated their worldview on power. And the neocons in particular are going to come out swinging on this idea that Trump represents the ultimate triumph of multiracial Americanism. Trump picked up an enormous number of Hispanic votes and won in all racial categories. And they're going to claim that this idea refutes the concept that demographic changes are going to give the country over to the left, which is, I think, short term they're correct, but long term, ultimately, demographics is destiny, as they say. That was a very long answer to your question, Mr. Burden.
If I may add, what I find interesting most about the different groups that are going to try and form into coalition around Trump's second administration is the fact that what it means for us and our own organizations, right? It's certainly could be far more beneficial than a Harris-Walz administration, but it does remain to be seen how much we can rely on them to not persecute us.
Well, I mean, for us, I mean, it's just a mad dash now to try to expand as much as possible because no one's going to get censored in the short term. Yeah. Like, I think the threat of cancellation is at an all-time low at this stage. It's just that, and this is one thing too, Jay and Fritz. I'm writing a kind of mini article about this. The left is way less energetic than it was in 2016. Aaron and I were both wrong. I guess I was kind of suspecting that this would be the case if Trump won. In 2016, they were furious. Now, it's just like they're sleepy. They're in this mode of I can't even. They're not doing anything. They're out for the count. They're totally out of ideas. It's going to be years before they get a narrative that they can agree on again. And even then, they're going to have to go through a space that does not accept all of their moral presuppositions as law, which is what they always relied on to maintain their sort of authority in political spaces.
And I think they'll also start coming across castles that they once thought were just kind of hills that they could easily cross, but now they're actually well defended. In the sense of, I mean, ideally, you know.
So two things. One, Dave, I think you're largely right, particularly as regards the threat of cancellation. But I actually think that especially the next 2 years will be characterized by a different fight, not necessarily right versus left, but so-called woke right versus conservatives. I think you've already seen a good bit of this coming from Rufo, from Lindsay, from that coalition. I think that there will be a move to separate MAGA from us. I think that, like I said before, you started to see the kind of opening shots of that battle kick off. And I think that if anything, that is more likely to be the quote unquote discourse instead of us bashing SJWs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the question is, there's something that's fundamentally, I think this election, this loss really destabilized what we used to know as the left. Now, like, the forces that drive the left are still ascendant and will continue to dominate our society. The demographic change is going to keep on going on. The growing government and managerial state will keep on going on. The cratering birth rates will keep on going on. This standard degeneration will go on. But the left as an organized force, the way it existed after 2011 till now, is in complete disarray. And I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think that they're going to exist as a cohesive force. And this is a huge advantage for us. A huge advantage for us because we control areas where discourse can actually be meaningful.
Well, I'm curious, Dave. I was talking to my wife and some friends about this, and one of my friends made the point that this seems like the repudiation fully and totally of Obama, right? That Obama was this sort of messianic figure, and he had his 2 terms, and Clinton was sort of supposed to be a continuation. Oh, wait, that didn't work. Well, now we've got Biden back, and he was with Obama, and that's basically the same thing. And if Harris had won, I think it would have been viewed as, well, this is normal. We're going back to the new normal. And the fact that Trump won, not only the Electoral College, but the popular vote, seems to be a repudiation of Obama and his kind of rainbow coalition strategy. Now, when I say that,
don't interrupt, but I'm going to add here, it doesn't help that narrative of normality that the one big victory the Democrats had outside of Obama was in a year that, by all measurements, was an anomaly. People were locked in their houses. Voting completely changed. So the idea that we're ever going to have, I mean, if Trump gets in after 4 years, the idea that 2028 is going to be like 2020 and not like 2024 or 2016 is looking increasingly unlikely.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's also apparent as with the demographic shift, since, again, the majority of Hispanic men went for Trump this time. And again, he didn't get the black vote, but he got a considerably larger portion of it this time. The idea that, we can just throw open the borders and flood. If we can do that quick enough, we can just win every election. That just didn't manifest.
Well, that's the danger, and it's the opportunity and a danger both in one in those things, right? Because while that does mean the Republican Party is going to be viable going forward as a portal to get power and to solidify power, the physics of human organization have indeed not changed, I assure you. Like as a student of history, eventually these demographic effects will assert themselves. It might take 100 years, but demographics is destiny on a long enough time frame. And so if Republicans go back to the neocon narrative about how they're going, obviously Hispanics have always been a part of the American fabric, but if you think you're going to replace the population and still have the same country, they're just operating with a phony view of politics.
Oh, I certainly am not saying that. I'm thinking just in the short term for the Democrats, obviously their plan kind of was foiled. because as you said, yeah, the danger is, and seems fairly likely, is that this is going to start diluting the Republican Party to being a far more of the centrist party than being the right-wing opposition, especially if the left just starts crumbling.
Trump, this is what we actually see. This is another danger. And I think, Mr. Burton I'd like you to comment on this, right? Like, Trump's coalition is bigger now. Like, his victory is bigger in 2024 than it was in 2016, but his coalition is also more diverse, which means that you're arguing over essentially potentially a smaller piece of the pie coming from our point of view.
That's true. Now, what I will also say is effectively the two groups that got Trump the office were white women and men under 30. Right, those were the
white married women. Did white women go for Trump? I guess he made a gain in them, right?
Yeah. So that was the big change from 2020 to 2024. Now, what's particularly interesting about that, I was on the Longhouse, our Norwegian compatriots, for a stream today, and it was a little bit disorganized. That's my bad, but nonetheless, some of the things that we were talking about is one of the other groups that proved to be decisive, particularly in Pennsylvania, was actually the Amish, right? And so we were going through Trump's promises, and you're certainly right. The coalition has grown and has become more diverse. And in that, there's more fingers in the pie, but there are now more people interested in things I generally like, right? So we were kind of talking about, RFK and his mission to destroy the FDA, right? RFK's, to put it mildly, kind of an odd guy, but he's kind of declared his personal crusade against the Food and Drug Administration. Well, that's interesting, right? Because who do the Amish hate? Also the FDA, right? And so you're 100% right now, right? Like there are Hispanics on side. There are, more white women than before. And look, like, I'm not trying to present an overly rosy picture of this, but I think that given the strong mandate, we might get a few things that we actually really want, because now it's not just us, right? Flyover Americans, although Dave, I know you don't quite fit into that category. There are more people in line. And obviously, look, like, the Amish don't exactly have people in positions of power, right? Kind of by definition. But at the same time, if you're the Republican Party and you want to keep winning Pennsylvania, you have broken a quietist streak that basically runs, 300 years. And, admittedly, these are the Washington Generals of politics, right? They're not exactly the cream of the crop, but I hope at the very least those type of opportunities won't be thrown away. Sorry, that's a very wordy answer to your question, but nonetheless, it's what I've been thinking about.
The white women are an interesting demographic because in many ways, white women was what Kamala Harris organized her. I mean, it was a particular kind of white women, of single white women, but the entirety of Kamala's optics were organized around this group. And what was the podcast she went on? The first podcast was something called like "Call Her Daddy" or something like that.
Like "Call Me Daddy." Like,
yeah, it's like a parody of an aging millennial sex podcast name. Like,
yeah,
you couldn't make this up, right? Like the implicit embedded rape fantasy, like the safe kind of kindergarten language, the bubbly beige aesthetics. It's like single millennial woman core is everything about that, and that's what designed Kamala's appearance, and yet she still kind of lost them, which is interesting, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a potentially an under-discussed aspect of this, which is that Trump completely monopolized the largest figures in so-called alt media, right? Like the fact that he got Joe Rogan to endorse him, who is, I mean, I think before this endorsed primarily bizarre third-party candidates.
He was a Bernie bro, wasn't he?
Right, shortly before the election. I mean, Joe Rogan is the biggest podcaster in the world. I think his viewership rivals that of CNN, right? It's incredibly huge. And so you have that, but also not just Trump. You have Vance, you have Elon, you have RFK making continual appearances on Trump. Theo Vaughn, who's another comedian, he had JD Vance on for a rather spicy interview, which was kind of funny. But effectively, I think that this is a similar extension of kind of the theater of battle. that both the Obama Facebook election, then the kind of like meme war for Trump, and now basically entirely because Elon bought Twitter, sort of this whole other kind of like realm has been opened up. And again, when we're talking about which of these two elite groups is more powerful and winning out, it does seem as if the teal guys, right, the Silicon Valley fellows, won Trump the election. Now, obviously, look, like you were right. There have been signs that we're going to get a whole lot of Zionists in the foreign affairs. Now, I will say some of that is difficult to parse because you have people like Mike Pompeo going on television saying he's going to be this, but no confirmation to it. And also, again, sorry, one more thing. On Rogan, Trump savages Mike Pompeo, savages a lot of his friends. And look, Trump saying something doesn't mean that it will happen. But I think that there seems to be a genuine, there seems to be a game being played between these two influence groups for the kind of like driver's seat. And that doesn't mean we win, but I would argue that is a better situation than what we saw under Bush when that was the one game in town, right?
Yeah. I mean, it does create some problems with how we're going to negotiate who actually rules. But I mean, this is a huge opportunity, right? Because there is no ideology of neocons, like post-crystal neoconism. There is no, I mean, like they're trying to dissonance with like Yoram Harzoni, right? Like, that character. Like they're trying to make Yoram Harzoni like the new neocon perspective. Like what is the consistent worldview? Not like some kind of cynical bullshit. That is the new non-Irving Kristol neocon party that is represented in Trump's coalition. It doesn't exist, right? People are still trying to invent it. The only person who's tried is Yoram Harzoni. What is the ideology of the Silicon Valley PayPal mafia? I mean, I know Malcolm and Simone Collins are trying to do stuff like that, but it's still really, really wacky, and it makes absolutely no sense. So the great advantage here is that you need a political formula that has a narrative structure attached to it to maintain power. And these people, the coalition members, have anything approaching a coherent narrative about how America is supposed to work. And to the extent that they do, like Yoram Harzoni, it's essentially trying to repackage paleocon points in a way that's more palatable to, how should I put this, select foreign allies that have well-funded representation inside American political discourse.
That was an impressive amount of words to get that.
was that too roundabout? I don't know what to say. Right?
No, I know exactly what you meant. I was applauding your ability.
All you need to say though to the Yoram Harzonis is, okay, I want Yoram Harzoni, but for us.
Yeah.
And I mean, what is, I don't even know what the Yoram Harzoni response to that is. He's obviously, I mean, he's a good guy, but he's obviously not very comfortable with those ideas.
Well, and I think that one of the other open questions is what will be the relationship between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, right? Because those two had a very public spat. Right, Netanyahu is one of the first world leaders to congratulate Biden, and I don't want to turn this into a rant about the war in Gaza, but Benjamin Netanyahu is in a very, very precarious position where he is under indictment. Well, not even, he's been convicted of a number of crimes and is effectively holding off his sentencing by the fact that there is an ongoing national emergency, right?
And there's like apparently some form of attempted coup right now, where there's riots outside in Israel right now after him dismissing, who was the general or the chief of staff that he controversially had fired?
A name I cannot pronounce, but I know who you're referring to. And what's especially interesting about that, right, is that when we talk about Zionism, people use that in a very broad term. But what that effectively means is people who like the Likud party, right? This kind of like effectively one party state of Israel. So for instance, right, Jerry Falwell of the Moral Majority, he had his personal jet paid for by the Likud party, right? They bought it for him. So you could say, all right, he's in that camp. And it's difficult to say, like, what does that machine become without Netanyahu? Or what does that machine become in America when you have sort of a spat between the leaders of America and of that party? And again, I'm not trying to sell anyone on copium here, far from it. But again, I think that it's an interesting situation to be in, and is starkly different from 2016. Now, again, like, obviously, Donald Trump accepted $150 million from Miriam Adelson. So, there's no like clean split. But when we're talking about, this kind of battle between these two influence groups, I think that we may see a shift towards the Silicon Valley types.
Yeah. The problem here is that all of this literally is going to rest on like a set of about 30 conversations that largely goes on in the West Wing. So, I think that when we talk about who wins the narrative, who's represented in alternative media, and how we can get our ideas out there, I think the path is very clear. But insofar as who rules Trump's decision-making in his first 100 days, which is where the real money is, I don't think, I think the die is kind of cast. We'll just see what fate and Trump's mood provide us. And I have a sense that he's going to lean into the new neocon perspective a little bit much, but that carries within it opportunities, because a lot of the more poisonous elements of the neocon coalition have exited, and they're now willing to kind of renegotiate. And a lot of things that they care about, we don't really care about. We care about Western countries. And if people are making deals, there's opportunity there, even if sort of a party that we feel is sort of ideologically in some abstract sense opposed to us is eventually the victor in Trump's coalition. You could get what you need to survive from that exchange, and I think that people should keep an open mind in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious. This is another kind of burning question in my mind, which is, what is the future of the MAGA movement after Trump, right? Because he's done it. He's got a second term. He very unlikely to even, there will be no third term, obviously, unless something really dramatic happens. And either way, he's an old man, right? So effectively, in the near future, there will be a MAGA without Trump. And so, who do you guys identify as, the possible, next generation? Do you think there can be a MAGA without Trump? And I guess I'm curious, where do you see that movement going over the next couple of years?
If I may take the lead on this one, if that's
sure.
Okay. I mean, yeah, Trump is like one of the once in a lifetime or once in a generation politicians. Like, maybe not the same policies, but he certainly has the same impact. He's going to have the same impact on, I guess, the broadly more conservative movement as Ronald Reagan did, wherein, in 20 to 40 years, millennial dads are going to keep talking about, praising about the days of Donald Trump. But yeah, I think, so I don't think there's going to be any very clear successor. JD Vance seems like a potential candidate for 2028, certainly, but I feel like it's going to maybe fracture or kind of dilute or dissolve into the broader conservative movement, because I think the older, more insane neocons are kind of melting away. They're retiring, they're too old, or they've already left the Republican Party. And so I think it's just going to broadly kind of blend into the conservative movement. So it might not really be called MAGA anymore. It'll still be a rallying cry as it was with Ronald Reagan, but I think you're going to see it. It'll be interesting to see if they can transition from being the underdog to acting like they're in power.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I mean, MAGA essentially just means what we would call paleoconservatism, or traditional right-wing ideas. Although even the followers don't know that yet, that is what the movement represents. It's got to be bigger than Trump. Trump's an old man. He's almost too old to be in the position that he is right now to do the things that he needs to do to reform American government or to restructure it. Obviously, the successor that is most apparent is J.D. Vance. I know a lot of people in our circles hate J.D. Vance. He's got people who love him too. And people see him as kind of a carpetbagger, which, yeah, he kind of is, right? He is kind of a fake version of himself in a certain regard. But look, I mean, in some sense, I don't think it is going to be J.D. Vance. I don't think he is. I think he's kind of a personality that is going to always be in support of this resurgence. The person that needs to be the representation of MAGA needs to be a singular figure that has a sort of monarchical energy like Trump does, but he just needs to be like 20 or 30 years younger than Trump is right now. Just being a really good politician that has a good, that can put together an argument and do an interview really, really well is not what the movement needs. And the movement has to be monarchical in its organization if it wants to accomplish anything. It has not trained up an alternative elite yet. All the elites it has are imported from, like we've been going over in this podcast. All the elites that the MAGA movement has associated with it are not natives of the MAGA movement. They are imported from disaffected elites that used to be voting in the blue coalition. So there needs to be a monarchical figure, at least until they actually train up a new elite that generates sort of competent people as a matter of course, and not because they're massively disillusioned like we are. And he needs to have energy and sort of a monarchical spirit. And that's the future. That's the only future that a movement like this can have. And this kind of, I mean, I don't know if I want to change the subject, but there might be still growth opportunities on the left. At this stage, where we are right now, there should be absolutely positively no competent men that have existent testicles on the left right now that are below the age of 50. If you are competent, intelligent, a true believer, and you actually are able to father children, you should not be on the left right now. This is not the place for you. And to the extent that there are those people still on the left and in capacities as true believers, they need to be incorporated into a new coalition. I see that as a growth opportunity.
So Dave, I completely agree with you. One of the things that I think is interesting about this is we're not the only person noticing this. Hassan Piker, right, one of these lefty streamers, went on a massive meltdown, basically saying like, all you young men, you're sharing fascist memes in your group chat, you talk like fascist, just going on a full meltdown. And I think that there's been a sort of a push-pull, right, that you mentioned earlier, that we are the place where discourse happens. And so I think for young inquisitive minds, this is where you end up. I mean, I hate to say it, that's how I ended up here, right?
Yeah,
so that's the pull.
Me too, right? That's how we all ended up here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I just wanted to talk about ideas, and now all of a sudden I'm kind of a leader, right?
And you also have the push, which is basically young heritage Americans need not apply, right? At sort of every level of certain institutions, right? That you were continually told, you and people like you are the fault for everything wrong in the country. I was on Timeline Earth the other night talking about this. And, in my own example, right, I went to school, got brought into an auditorium, and there was a big lady at the front, and she basically said, I'm paraphrasing, look to your left, look to your right. One of those men is a rapist. And I looked and I realized, well, I don't know what I am, but I hate you. And I think that is a tremendous opportunity for growth because, look, they're blocking the most talented members of society out of a natural path to advancement. And you do that for long enough and you create a very frustrated group of people it's sort of a slow running version of the based draft idea that was kicking around maybe 3 years ago.
Look to your left, lady. Look to your right. 1 out of 3 women is a raging bitch, and it's not any of the women sitting next to you. That whole look to your left, look to your right thing. I think I've been in at least 3 of those rooms in my time as a millennial, coastal millennial. So I couldn't help but chuckle. I mean,
what's funny is that it reminds me of actually the event that kicked off me joining, I guess, or wanting to start actually talking about ideas like this was, I wasn't at the event, but as a younger evangelical in 2015 is when at some evangelical conference they invited a bunch of BLM leaders, and you had a large black woman on the stage telling a majority white audience that they're all complicit in white supremacy. And I'm thinking, what a wonderful thing for somebody in the evangelical movement to say. And so that kind of lit a fire under me, and I wasn't even there, so I can't imagine how many people started questioning things there. But now they actually have a place to go, and that's what, again, sorry to hawk this more, but what groups like the OGC are for.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is going to be an ongoing battle, Fritz, and it's really going on more in Protestantism now than it is in Catholicism. Mm-hmm. Although, what was it? Social Matter had an excellent post about this going on inside the Catholic Church. The thing is, the Catholic Church is remarkably less discourse-based than is the Protestant churches. This is something that there is an incredible split between the leadership of Christian churches and their core believers. And the leadership believe in something that is just completely incoherent.
I mean, yeah, if you want more information on it, you should, Megan Bashram, I think, has been talking a lot about this for the past several months, which just a very short tangent. It was, I made some of my first videos on like at the time, leader of the ethics committee of the Southern Baptist Convention, Russell Moore. And it was actually quite invigorating to see my views validated by Megan Bashram coming out with her book In Shepherd's Clothing, or Shepherds for Sale, kind of criticizing this entire elite class of Christian leaders who have basically all completely drunk the Kool-Aid of the progressives and were taking money from them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, the problem with this, and Black Horse assures me that this is, I don't know if you know Black Horse, but he's one of the leaders of the Beowulf Society. And he assures me that this problem is solved, but it's not, I think that I've heard the person you're talking about speak, and I agree that there's a certain amount of money being transferred to these leaders, and they have these progressive sympathies, but that's not what's driving this. What's driving this is status and education. The evangelical movement was essentially, to borrow a Curtis Yarvin term, completely pwned in the early 2000s.
Yes.
And it's not because of like the New Atheists. I mean, I was part of those debates. Like those debates did not go well for the New Atheists, like just seeing them. But what really destroyed the thing is that Christianity coded as low class. Yes. And it coded as really low class. And for the last 20 years, it coded this incredibly low class and low status thing. And furthermore, the education system, the higher you went on the education system, until you got to at least Ivy Leagues, where it kind of tapered out a little bit and it was a little cool to be Christian. The higher you went in the education system, the more uncool it was to be Christian. So like the evangelicals in the 2000s were something like, oh, our apostasy rates are really low. I mean, like, yeah, you only lost 10%, but that 10% was like your valedictorians and everyone who went to the city to become professional. I mean, this is, and I'm told that this, like with sort of the split of young men away from the left, this trend is in the process of ending. But the status question is what destroyed the prestige of American Christianity for young people.
So there are several things here, right? This problem with the lack of prestige in American Christianity actually goes back quite a while. It goes back about 100 years to what is called either the Great Modernist Crisis or the Great Betrayal, right? This is sort of preceding the monkey trial, where effectively many of our legacy institutions, like the Ivies, that were seminaries, effectively apostatized, right? Became modernist, right? Denied, the divinity of Christ, the virgin birth. And so this created this giant gulf where it used to be, right, that if you were in a small, relatively prosperous congregation, you'd send off your best and brightest to Harvard, they'd get a divinity degree, come back, and now you have a well-educated Ivy League preacher.
Yeah, and you weren't getting Reinhold Niebuhr, though. You were getting people who essentially had converted to the successor ideology at some point.
Well, I'm talking about pre-1920, right? In the kind of older system.
Pre-1920, you literally got Reinhold Niebuhr, right?
Exactly. And so after that, it creates this gap between basically the leadership and the base. This is where we see the origin of actually a lot of dispensationalism, but like the Bible College, right? Which is basically a non-accredited institution for, strip mall pastors to be educated in, right? So this problem has been going on for quite a long time. You're 100% right. And that hollowing out where you basically took your talented 10th for several generations and shipped them off, I mean, that's happened. Now, I think that Black Horse and I agree on this in the sense that same process I was mentioning earlier with young men broadly, where if you look like the average American churchgoer, you are no longer as welcome as you once would have been in kind of the traditionally prestigious institutions, has basically created a bottleneck, right, of people who maybe would have, gone on to, to the Ivies, but quite simply can't, right? They're stuck, quote unquote, at a state school. And to be honest, they've developed an immense amount of resentment for the kind of current order. And the reason I speak so confidently about this is me and my friends, right? All of us had this experience.
And it was me as well.
And
I mean, the reason why I think it's also an explanation for why a lot of younger educated men, if they didn't become atheists, they went Orthodox and Catholic. Seeing is something that was a little less indicative of that, and also seeing the kind of rise of the wokeness in evangelical circles. Because I think going back to the 2000s, you were absolutely right, Dave, is because being conservative and a Christian at that time in the mid to late 2000s was probably like some of the worst narratives, some of the worst optics you could have at the time, because you had an incredibly unpopular and perceived moronic president who was an evangelical, leading an incredibly unpopular war. You had a lot of the social issues raging about gay marriage, and you had the rising star of Obama, and just all the perception in the media was cranked up to evangelical Christians are absolute morons. And I feel like a lot of the people like Russell Moore or something, in attempt to compensate, we're like, what if we just try and ingratiate ourselves to this as much as we can?
So there's one thing I want to bring up, because I think it's actually interesting to discuss. What do we make of the fact that it seems like, despite still kind of holding a lot of institutional power, it seems like liberals have lost an immense amount of prestige? Like, look at Destiny, look at Kamala Harris. Like,
actually, before we answer that question seriously, could we answer it unseriously and just entertain what the hell is happening to Destiny right now?
Of course.
Well, this guy was perceived, at least a year ago, as a somewhat serious political commentator. Now it seems like he's going into dark side Bill Christian territory. But it's like he's become a character like Boogie 2988. What the hell happened? I mean, he's
didn't you see on Twitter
drug addled? He's like this drug addled, like lunatic. I don't know what else to say.
Oh, didn't you see on Twitter, though, that he's people are saying it's just one tweet. I don't know if I can find it, but it's claiming no, he should be the leader of the new left wing movement. He can, and it's saying this completely seriously. It's like, he knows how to speak to young people. He's smart. He's the one.
Oh God, it's just there's this meme that I have been repeating, which is that guy praying, saying, "Please God, let this be true because it'd be so funny." That's just me imagining Destiny becoming the leader of the new. I mean, essentially that's what Vosh is banking on. But I mean, these people just seem completely. These people are just jokes. It's
Vosh, the person who just today or a couple days ago called the working class bunch of idiots.
Well, I think
the classic Marxist.
It's an interesting thing because Dave, we've all been talking about young men and their shift to the right, and I think that one of the purposes BreadTube and the kind of like lefty streamer space served was as a backstop against that, right?
Yeah. They were the plumbers. They were fixing the leak, and it wasn't. They didn't even fix it. They just stopped it for a little bit, right? Like that's what Vosh was. That's why Vosh was. It's important. What's Vosh's number one skill? It's to talk with a deep voice. That's it's to look masculine while being incredibly cocked. And like, what was Destiny's key asset in his glory days? It was the fact that he had a hot girlfriend and then a hot wife, which we later learned, wasn't so much of a bragging right.
It's debatable to say how much it was his.
Yeah, exactly. It's his in kind of a timeshare sense of the word, right? I mean, own a house in Aspen with 20 other families or something like that. I mean, this was absolutely an attempt to stem the tide with young men. The question is, I mean, that's how Vosh began. That's how ContraPoints began too. I don't want to be like the BreadTube historian, right? But ContraPoints began as a de-radicalizer, and then became like the main audience was women and trans women. And Vosh was supposedly initially supposed to be like a debate bro for the left, more so than Destiny was. And then he became like another trans and coon-brain influence channel. Like, he literally, his audience is literally that joke that people from the Kamala Harris advertisement, where like the white guy is supposed to identify with his porn consumption habits above everything and anything else. That is absolutely, but I think it ultimately this can't maintain itself, right? What is the identity for young men inside the leftist coalition? There can't be any.
Well, and I think that the attempts to like the white dude or the men for Kamala ad that you spoke about on Orange show, right? This kind of like school marm, like kind of like lecturing, but also vote for me attitude. I mean, I think that alienated an immense number of people, right? Like Walls in himself was sort of like a white minstrel show.
Yes.
Right. He was like, putting on the act like, oh, I like my mayonnaise tacos. I'm just a regular old white dad.
And everyone calls him coach, but he can't talk about football games in an accurate way, and apparently doesn't know the rules.
And can't load an actual gun correctly.
Yeah, he's supposed to be a hunter, can't load a gun, all of these things.
Yeah, again, it's that whole backfiring, especially it's the same thing with the whole white dudes for Harris thing is, I think you said that on with Oren, right? Is that the left doesn't know how to do anything but portray white men as stupid and incompetent, and the only thing that they're good for is to simper for and bend the knee to the empowered women. So they can't portray, they can't come up with any sort of narrative that has white men and young men in any sort of position in their coalition that is anything above being basically a complete slave.
Well, and I think that really matters because, you were mentioning earlier, Dave, that it seems like this campaign was basically run by millennial women. And the logic would basically, like within the bounded rationality would be, now we've got this influx of young people who are social media savvy. They will deliver us, a great victory. And I think one of the big problems that the left faces is that they have no backbench talent, right? They have no rising up and comers to draw from. Okay, obviously they have people like the squad, what remains of them, although they're no longer looking quite as young and fresh faced. But to me, I feel like we got a trial run for the DNC backbench, and it went very, very badly. And so just as the MAGA movement is obviously looking for a successor, I think is an open question as to who runs the DNC after this, because as I'm one to say, the day of the pillow is fast approaching.
Yeah, the answer to that is obviously Gavin Newsom. But that's a short-term solution, right? Because Gavin Newsom is quite a savvy political leader, and he is the obvious successor to leadership in the Democratic Party. But long-term, how do you make more Gavin Newsoms? If I'm a young white guy and I'm like, yeah, I want to be who Gavin Newsom is, I want to have what Gavin Newsom has, that desire essentially makes you a Republican. Just expressing the desire to have the life that Gavin Newsom has makes you de facto right wing. In this stage of the progressive movement.
Well, exactly. And I think that, that phrase from AA, putting the woke away, has, sort of entered the debate, right? Is the question of, well, can they backslide on that, right? Can they stay as the left, but admit that maybe there's a place for quote unquote normal Americans? And I think that's still an open question. I mean, I think that when we're talking about, the Democratic Party sort of taking a good long look in the mirror, we'll see if that happens or not, because, you mentioned, right, that they're not used to living in a world where disagreeing with them is legally permissible.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a fundamental sea change, because they've been pushing through an open door since FDR. Right. And obviously, Donald Trump is not a FDR level reshaper of the American empire. But this is a sea change for them.
I mean, I think this is, when you think about it as somebody who is really into debate and historical ideas in high school, but then kind of got shut down by the meat grinder of diversity and politicized humanities in college and decided to go into engineering. Me managing my opinions and exploring them was sort of in a constant environment of adversarial pushback. If you were one of my progressive colleagues, essentially these discussions were little LARPy professional wrestling bouts where the guy is designed to fold to you. The conclusion is predetermined. They have no idea how to function in an environment where an idea actually could be. And that's why it's so easy for them to cancel people, because they can't imagine being ideologically committed to an idea that's necessarily going to lose. They never had to stand on principle. Their ideas are completely aligned to the ideas that are promoted by the educational establishment. And you say, well, they've been pushing on open doors since FDR. Well, I mean, kind of. The thing is that there's still enough of the old world there present through the silent generation's education and the boomers generation's education, and even a little bit Gen X's education, for that adversarial environment still to be a reality. To succeed in FDR's cabinet, or maybe a better example would be LBJ or Ford or Clinton's cabinet, you needed to go through a process where you were actually competing with people, both ideologically and oftentimes physically, if you played sports or in the military or academically. And that's just not the case for someone like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris got her position by one word, by compliance. And so everyone we're seeing as up and coming leaders of the Democrats or the Progressive Coalition are people who got where they were through the skill of compliance.
And that does not make leaders.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even. I don't know what makes leaders. You minimally need that to have a leader, right? Mm-hmm. You need a lot more than that, but that's one of the puzzle pieces that's really missing from progressive education. You just have these kind of creatures that slither out of these Ivy League programs that are designed to promote them without any kind of rigor
Mm-hmm. They're not actually being trained. They're just kind of being having programs installed into them.
I mean, to a certain degree, there's always indoctrination.
Yeah,
but I'm wondering, like, this is a good example, actually, Fritz or Jay. Like Tim Walz versus JD Vance. Arguably, they are both fake, but JD Vance is a guy that has definitely been through a process that has forced him to kind of fight back a little bit. People say he's fake because they're concerned that his allegiances are more to essentially Peter Thiel than they are to his actual voters or actual people who he represents. But he is actually, he's the kind of person that the system generated before the 2000s. Tim Walz, despite his more advanced age, is the kind of man that is produced by the modern progressive education system. He's mainly known for being a team player, and he doesn't act like anybody who's been in a contentious environment and who's had to stand up for himself. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, maybe he's intelligent on paper. For all I know, he's very high IQ, although he doesn't come off that way. But it's just not the environment that leads to people who can manage anything.
To bring it to a pop culture reference, and I think you brought it up a while ago, it's the fact that, Star Trek, the world of Star Trek is kind of the leftist utopia, yet it's filled with highly competent, aggressive men and masculine personalities that would be completely impossible to actually produce in a progressive utopia. How do you get, the French gentleman Picard, who's a competent, basically a naval commander, and loves poetry and old novels? You can't get that with and you look at what progressives are making now before the utopias even existed. How on earth could you get them to command a starship?
Yeah, that was always the joke in Star Trek is, but Picard represents progressive liberalism, but he is a function of an environment that is reactionary, mm-hmm. whereas Q is advancing the reactionary ideas, but he's essentially exactly what progressives want to be. Like, he's an omnipotent being who can conform reality to his whims, and for whom the universe is just a playground.
And yet when all of his powers are taken away, he's terrified of everything.
Oh, I don't know if that particular episode. I'm just talking about the contest between him and Picard. But mm-hmm. It's there's an inversion there that's kind of interesting. But you see this generally. I mean, I guess the question just is, predicting the future is always kind of dicey. I kind of think the ball is really in the left court right now. For me, the right has kind of the beats mapped out at this stage. Trump is going to, short of some attempts to disrupt his ascension to the presidency, which I don't foresee. It's always possible, I guess. He will become president, and a new coalition of leaders will try to grab power. The Democrat coalition is going to be in incredible chaos for the next 2 years, and I don't know what comes out of it. I really don't. I mean, the most powerful people in the Democrat coalition are hysterical white women, hysterical millennial white women, but I don't think hysterical single millennial white women can rule anything. I think it's impossible to imagine them ruling anything.
I mean, even watching like the meltdowns aren't even really. I think Paul Ramsey was talked about this. It's not even really fun anymore because these millennial women, when they were 8 years ago, they've aged horribly and have only become kind of more pathetic and miserable. They've kind of morphed into cat ladies as opposed to the more young, dynamic, college age women who they were like, we're going to get out there and we're going to go organize and whatever. But, these people who are all like horribly mentally ill and on a whole cocktail of medications don't really seem to be capable of actually doing anything.
Well, there's the bedroom feminist, and the bedroom feminist grew up. And I think people realized at some stage that you weren't really arguing against people, you were arguing against an emotion. and that this emotion and this way of being was empowered by a system whose legitimacy was not really up for debate. Jay Burden, you haven't said anything for a while, and you've come off mute. Did you have anything?
Sorry. That was largely accidental, but you know what? I'll take the opportunity to speak. So here's what I think, right? You're right that there is this kind of, moment of chaos. And, when presented between the two options, I was under no illusions that, Trump will lead us into based world. I'd love to be wrong there. But effectively, one, I had to live here, so it's an easy choice, right? But two, this offers us a reprieve, right? This offers us a moment relatively free from the eye of Sauron, right? From the repression of the regime, to organize, right? We managed to get a whole lot done during the Biden years. And now we have at the very least 4 years to breathe. And I think that we should not waste that time because, the kind of the problems we're identifying are very real. And, one of the amazing things about, politics and kind of like the post Cold War era is we've devoted an immense amount of time to very, very stupid problems, right? And that's the thing about history, right? It comes back. And when it comes back with a vengeance. And if your leaders are wasting all of their effort solving stupid problems and have kind of chopped at the limb they're sitting on, right? Have gotten rid of their ability to replenish themselves, well, those real problems are going to become very real. And our leaders are not set up to address those. And so I think the kind of organizational efforts we've, devoted our time to, right, are very important and will continue to be. And now we have a chance to grow unhindered. And I think it would be foolish to waste that opportunity.
I think, as I said, Dave, I think on your last podcast said, if Trump wins, we go full Viking mode, which is a really fun saying. But I think, go ahead.
I mean, here's, the question is like, what do you take? And what can you take? I mean, the Trump administration, I mean, this is always the problem, is that Democrats have established ways to give money to their constituents that have already been developed and passed over the last 60 years. Republicans have none. So the thing that you want, the places you want to expand into are, it's actually a little more difficult than you might think, right? Like, how does the Old Glory Club expand? How does Sildings or Beowulf expand? Right now, it seems that people are, there's membership, there's interest, there's enthusiasm, there's organization. We're feeling a niche that hasn't been filled for a long time. And that's great. But then there's the question of, okay, well, how do we get funding the way that other similar organizations get funding? And then it becomes a much harder question.
It's how do you get the patron-client relationship really going in terms of resources, because what you want is to convince the people in power to give you money to do what you want to, to do what you want to be able to do. That also benefits them.
You want to get paid to lobby government. Like, that's the ultimate grift. I mean, you get paid to accumulate power that will then be used to get yourself paid. It's like the ultimate self-licking ice cream cone. I mean, it does kind of destroy the government eventually on a long enough time frame, but that's the kind of activist organizations you're competing against. And I don't know if anything like that will become available to people on the right. It's kind of hard to see how, but there is a need for it. I'll say that, right? There is a need for a new set of activist organizations that can actually move a large quantity of money around. And I think that, to be what it is, I think places like the OGC will have to be kind of grassroots funded to keep them sort of not influenced by professional interests. But there will need to be some way of taking money from the system and using it in a non-progressive direction.
And I think that's the task before us, is to figure out how to do that. Is to get the most out of the next 4 years or however long we have under a regime that's not openly hostile to us, to be able to get as much as we can out of it. And I guess trying to breach that wall between, say, the OTC and then people who actually have the money.
Well, the avenue available is obviously the normie conservative sphere. That's where the growth opportunities are.
The boomers with money.
The problem is that the boomers with money feel... This is always the difficulty. Again, it's an obstacle the left does not have that we do have, which is if we win, our boomers with money go, oh, well, things are working. I can buy a new boat, right? When the left wins, they're like, oh, hey, let's spend more money to take over an even larger portion of the government. These two things are not equivalent. The thing is the very thing that gets our ideas closer to power, this election, also makes it more difficult to unseat the neoconservative ideas from the leadership classes of people who run these well-funded organizations. And, you know, that is our task ultimately, and or our most immediate task. And I don't know, maybe it is to a certain degree working up from local government. That seems like it's worked for a lot of people. And certainly I think there's actually almost kind of greater opportunity in blue areas, just because there is no rival to the anti-progressive force, and it's just the Wild West. So if you wanted to run a candidate and they were broadly allied with our cause, it's not like they have to deal with an existing Republican apparatus that sees them as an outsider. I'm stunned everyone with my brilliant observations. Do you guys want to, I mean, I think we were going to go on for, you know, until the end of the hour. Do you want to take some super chats and then see if that, you know, I don't know if there's any angles that we haven't explored. I mean, again, I think I feel kind of self-conscious talking constantly about the left, but the ball is very much in their court. The ball is very much in their court. The ball is in our court when it comes to organizing, developing things like publishing houses, writing books, getting our ideas out there, and sort of dominating the discourse space online. One opportunity that immediately opens up for us, and that I haven't heard anyone discuss yet, is how can we get reasonable censorship standards on the other social media platforms? That happened with X/Twitter. Can it happen to YouTube? Can it happen? I mean, no one uses Facebook anymore, but can it happen to Instagram? Can it happen to any of these other places where discourse? Can it happen to Twitch? Can it happen to Discord? If these places get wind that they're under investigation by the government, they will fold. They won't dare go against that. If they know that the eye is sore, but if they know that the eye of powerful groups in the government are looking at them, trying to, with the potential to cause them serious financial harm or to break up their company, they will desist from this behavior. And having avenues like YouTube, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there obviously was an algorithm change that deprioritized long form content on YouTube that I very distinctly remember happening in 2020. It was night and day. But, you know, to a large degree, we were chased off of YouTube. We were chased off of Facebook. We were chased off of Discord. Did these things open up? Is that an opportunity there?
Well, I think that's an open question, because we've seen sort of a swell of support for Trump among the kind of like other tech elite, right? So you had Bezos and Zuckerberg basically say things that were either nice about Trump or indicate, right, Bezos, that he wanted more conservatives at his paper. You know, Zuckerberg, you know, I don't know if he ended up endorsing Trump, but said positive things about him. And so, you know, when we talk about, you know, the new, like the sort of Silicon Valley coalition, why that is supporting the right, I think a big part of it, right, is that if you have a company that runs on IQ, right, that sort of hoovers up a ton of that, you can't have that and the kind of like ultimate DEI machine, right? Those are incompatible. And so I think that what we may see is that Musk was effectively an early adopter, right? And that Bezos and Zuckerberg are you know, the start of a trend of not of going, you know, full on Musk, right, shit posting, you know, reposting our guys, but there may be relaxed censorship standards. I think that would be reasonable to assume if these guys see what Musk has done as a success, and if they see their interests being more closely aligned to the kind of like nominal right wing in America. I think that that's a very reasonable thing to at least consider. Now, what can we do? To be honest, I don't know what the three of us can do, right? I have no say whatsoever. But I do think that the extreme censorship regime that built up around 2020 has already abated slightly, right? Like I can get away with things that I couldn't back then. But I think that as both the kind of the centralized narrative of, look for the fascists among you goes away, but also the people in charge of those companies, their eyes start to wander. I think that that's a very reasonable thing to expect.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's sort of a flip side of that, though, Jay, and that is just as DEI has been going on for a long time, and Blue America has been able to dominate the sphere of competent people, like elite human capital, as our friend Richard likes to put it. But there is an endpoint where the DEI starts destroying, killing the goose that laid the golden egg. But there's also a flip side to that, which is in order to be organized, groups of competent people and groups of people who care about the future have to have some unifying belief and a unified ability to kind of come together and be a community. That's where I kind of see our big growth potential. The Basque wing projects would need to get a lot thicker on the ground, but and they made a lot of progress in the last year and a half. But it just, in order to be kind of like a rival to what progressives have in urban areas, or something that looks somewhat similar to it, there need to be a lot of steps forward that are taken in that dimension.
Mm-hmm. It's why I think, to use the animal analogy, if we were in a period of being a field mouse, of being burrowed and trying to scavenge, we should be in the period of being foxes now, of scavenging, hunting, trying to build these up so that and being able to bear teeth as well, so that when the left comes back into power at some point, or the regime will think twice about going after people, I guess, or at least organizations that we build. I think that just begins with just doing the hard work on the ground, really. And providing what other organizations can't. Like, again, the OGC being the space for young men is really important.
Yeah, and there needs to be more than just one. I'm actually kind of surprised when you talk to conservatives and you say, okay, what are your youth organization efforts look like? And they're like, organizing young people? What? We've got college Republicans. You need more than that? No, I mean an organization that doesn't require a .edu email address to be a part of. Something that is permanent way of exercising power on the ground. And of course, none of them do anything like that, right? So we're just starting so much from behind the eight ball. It's hard to see where it really begins.
But at the same time, that means there's a huge amount of opportunities in front of us.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, there is 100%. And this is, is what Isaac Simpson has talked about a lot. I don't know. I like I said, I always see that the growth opportunities are in blue areas. There's kind of a process going on in red America that's glacial, but there are periods. So I think this is always the thing. Different areas of the country change differently. In red America, everything changes. I should say, in rural America, everything changes like really slowly, like glacially. And right now, you've got like a glacial shift between going from sort of the more neocon perspectives to what we would have classically called paleocon. In blue America, everything shifts quickly, right? Like there are preference cascades that just take over the entire group really, really quickly because someone published a book.
Things become vogue very
preference
fast.
cascade feels like it's happening right now. And it really feels like 2025 is going to be a year of preference cascades.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think, 2016 basically caused every single Republican to completely re-examine his priors. 2024 might do a similar thing for Democrats. And in that, there is an enormous opportunity. I mean, to pick up patrons, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that is going to be one of the tests, right, to see if the Republicans can turn themselves into a real political party, right? Which is, can they play patronage? So a couple of these things, right? I mentioned the Amish, right? The Amish gifted Trump Pennsylvania. Okay, they did something for them. So what do you do for the Amish? Well, you get the FDA to stop chimping out about raw milk, right? Things that Amish do. Okay, that's an easy one, right? That's something that's probably not that hard to do because the Amish have been around forever. And if we just leave them alone, that's something. But there are other examples of this, right? So Trump has, Trump has floated the idea of getting rid of income tax, which from an accounting perspective doesn't make a ton of sense. But from a how to make literally everyone in the country really happy with you perspective is a good move, right? Similarly, some of his other economic policies. And I think one of the differences that Trump presents is not only, to a certain degree, an understanding of patronage, but the loyalty has shifted from an institution to a man, right? It is a sense of personal loyalty to him. And I think that patronage becomes clearer when it is not, what did this amorphous blob congealed into Mitt Romney do for me? It is, what did Donald Trump, he himself, do? And so I think that it'll be interesting to see, if that kind of real personal loyalty is transferable. And also if he, as a man, recognizes the necessity to, bring in the same type of patronage that our enemies do.
Oh, Dave, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I unmuted. My wife was asking me a question. So we have some super chats. This might be a good time because I think we're kind of exhausted the like plain understanding of what what this election entails. I'll say this though. I mean, I'm going to write an essay about this when I get the chance. But this, when the history books are written, this will be the Trump era. It won't be the Obama era. It won't be the early 20th century. Won't be the global war on terrorism and its aftermath. This will be the Trump era. He is the defining figure of the early 20th century as far as American politics are concerned. Mm-hmm. And it just there's certain men at certain times that kind of seem to be wielding destiny in their hand. And it doesn't even matter if you really like them. They're just kind of like a force of nature, like a storm. Like, I don't personally really like Trump. He's not designed to appeal to a man like me. But at some point, you just have to kind of stand back and acknowledge reality. Like, okay, this person, history, providence, I don't want to say God, because that implies sort of divine endorsement that I don't necessarily think these characters have, right? I think there's a number of evil people that share in this quality too, but something about history has, pushed this person forward as a focal point for change. And that person is Donald Trump. And I think anybody who sees this election or sees the Donald Trump phenomenon and has not, and I say this to progressives too, I say, if you see the Donald Trump phenomenon with everything that it's entailed, from his original descent down the escalator at Trump Tower to his ascendancy now in 2024 after an assassination attempt and felony convictions and all the stuff. If you see that occurrence and you're still looking at politics the same way in 2024 as you were looking at politics in 2014, you are not a serious person. This does not make sense by the model that most people were using, unless you're like Curtis Yarvin or something like that and you were an early adopter, right? But for 90% of people, nothing about Donald Trump makes sense by the political theory we were all operating under in 2014. And so if you are a communist or a progressive or a liberal or a libertarian or just a standard Republican and you have not changed your point of view, I think you fundamentally failed to read the spirit of the age. And you need to, I don't know how to be like a progressive. You need to have some personal examination. I think you just need to kind of like take a look outside and see what's going on and read history and ask yourself what's real and what's an illusion.
And what's kind of funny about it is that Trump is in a way kind of a return to he's an example of kind of how politics historically normally goes. I think in a lot of ways.
Yeah. He is a return. He is a return to normal political forms, because in normal political forms, it is always the political formula is always high, low versus middle, and so the only way that non-degenerate lower middle class people have a chance against the nobility allying with sort of like a criminal underclass, the only way they have out of that is to throw their support behind some monarchical figure with monarchical energy. You'll hear this from Machiavelli, and this has been something that's been observed for ages. Caesar, this whole thing in the 19th century, this is something that Oswald Spengler, he laments this in the first chapter of The Decline. What's Oswald Spengler? I literally have it on my shelf.
Decline of the West.
Decline of the West. Thank you. Fall of the West. In the Decline of the West, he laments contemporary historians associating the Republican factions with modern populist movements. He says, like, you're an idiot. Like Julius Caesar was the supporter of the popularis. It was Brutus and Cassius and Cato who were representatives of the old school oligarchy. So it's a return to political normalcy, which means it's a return to political realism.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think that's an opportunity, especially for being able to spread more of our our dissident, not strictly, classical liberal ideas even further, kind of showing this is what happens, or this is what politics is normally supposed to be like. It's not this, we're going to be in the post-war consensus rules-based order forever.
Well, I think that's really, the interesting thing, because we were talking earlier about, the fact that we failed to go back to normal, right? That the Obama era never materialized. But I think that, more broadly speaking, right, the idea of, this kind of like slow creeping optimization of society to look more and more and more like, the kind of like vaguely left of center, vaguely left of center corporate boardroom, that dream is dead, right? Cheeto Hitler won. And I think that that dream dying, right, and fully dying is going to be very, very interesting. Like, we keep talking about why the left needs to go back and reflect, but fundamentally, right, we're back to an era of politics, right, where there are two real factions. And I think that, who knows, maybe MAGA gets reabsorbed, but I think the fact that was not an aberration, that we do still live in history. I mean, I think it's a good thing.
Trump killed Fukuyama.
100%.
That's, you want to put it that way. I mean, I know Aryan said this thing, like, everyone always tells you that Fukuyama isn't like the self-parody of himself, but I've read a lot of Fukuyama and he basically is kind of the self-parody of himself.
I mean, you can imagine the headline, right? Trump shot, Fukuyama killed.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Actually, no, that would have been a perfect headline.
I came up with the perfect tweet 3 months late.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you wouldn't be the first one for that one. Okay, I'm going to read some super chats, guys. Since we're on StreamYards, I can't project them because these are entropy. So Creeper Weirdo says, "I am here to gloat at you, Dave. I think Kumala will win, or it's up in the air." That's what I said. I thought I gave Kamala like a 55% chance of winning, and I said that it's basically a coin flip. Doing the Nate Silver stuff, but I don't charge people hundreds and thousands of dollars to come up with it's going to be a coin flip toss up. He says it wasn't even close. Sargon was right. AA was right. The black pill is a suppository. I'm in full Turley mode right now, and I'm never coming down. Yeah, I guess Turley made fools of us all.
The conservative revolution is here.
Yeah, exactly. We can't stop winning.
We're gonna get tired of winning.
We can't. I can't deny Dr. Steve Turley his day, and this is indeed his day. This is the Turley world that we've entered in currently. Yeah, I mean, you deserve your glows. I'll say this into my defense: anybody who says that a random event like this is predictable by modeling or feels is kind of lying to you. Like I'm really after Nate Silver as like a huge fraud. I think that he made himself the base of applying these sort of statistical techniques that work well with repeated systems with large sample sizes and consistent behavior. He applied those methods to elections, and because like this was sort of in the heyday of machine learning, he claimed that because he predicted the 2012 elections, like he was some kind of like math genius. And he's basically just taken people's money and given people like, I don't know, but I ran 80,000 simulations to prove that I don't know. Like he's been doing that for 12 years now. I feel like we're just in this guy is just a complete grifter.
Well, Dave, I'm going to be honest. I don't think you have any ground to stand on. No knowledge of statistics, and so I'm gonna Nate Silver till I die.
Yeah, Nate Silver. It's called principal component analysis. It was invented 50 years ago. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills and do the Zoolander Will Ferrell bit. He's only got 2 looks, or 1 look. So Creeper Weirdo says again. Now it's just the question of will they put the woke away? Well, in a sense, they will put the woke away. In a sense, they can put the woke away. This was always, and talk about fake fights, the fight between Academic Agent and R.N. McIntyre was always kind of a professional wrestling fight. I hate to spoil this for people in the audience, but for people who has talked to these people once at the same conference, they both know that in the long term, the woke can't be put away. But in the short term, the ruling class will try to do something just like that. And so it's like, it's kind of like this, we're going to have like a big wrestling matchup. It's good entertainment. It's good YouTube it's good radio, as the good old boys like to say, Anyway, Hunger for $15. I feel honored to have met all 3 of you gents in Meat Space. Well, I have not met Fritz actually in Meat Space, I don't think ever. The OGC chapters are doing great work on the ground. And OFC, it was Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, keeping this country together. God bless you guys. Yeah, well, thank you, Hunger. And
go ahead. Actually, I was going to say, I had the pleasure of meeting up with Hunger at the OGC conference, and he was also kind enough to give me a ride to the venue where we were eating. So I guess I owe you the gas money for that, but he's a very good guy. Very good guy.
I will say, Hunger and I get along famously, and might be my favorite one of the Anons I've met. It's a tough battle, but
it's Hunger and Anon anymore. I feel like him and Luke Templar and Liquid Swan are kind of in that like
second tier Anon.
Former Anons, like pretty much influencers at this stage, right?
Hunger, you'll always be an Anon to me.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite Anons were the ones that said, "Oh, I really love your channel," and I was like, "Oh, I'm being treated like a celebrity, as I always deserved when I was in Pennsylvania." It's like, well, thank you, peasants.
That's the thing with online is that you can always kind of get macro celebrity status, but it's kind of that's kind of a return to normalcy too. I mean, you were always supposed to be kind of a celebrity in your hometown, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're always supposed to have a group of friends who thought that you were kind of like a big, not like a big deal, but like, like you were a known quantity. It's only in the modern world where you're just like this meaningless consumer of product who works in a corporate job where you are essentially an entry in an HR checkbook. Yeah. I always like thinking basket weaving for me is like college football. I feel like the weaves only start like really happening when I leave the area. It's like for college football, colleges should pay me to root for their rivals, because every time I attend or watch a college football game and really care about it, the team I'm rooting for always loses. Okay, Creeper Weirdo for $5. Dave is onto something about the leftists being low energy now. There was a protest here in Portland. I saw like 20 people. I'm also on kiwi farms, and there doesn't seem to be much excitement. Yeah. The left is just totally... I mean, you getting the sense too, Jay?
Oh, 100%, right? I was coming back from Portland. Obviously, it was on election day, but I was kind of curious, right? And I believe there was a little bit of a something in Seattle that got, swiftly taken away. And then I think there was a protest in Chicago. I'm not even sure if there were any arrests. But I mean, the fact that I'm really having to look for these means that, to be honest, there's nothing, right? There's been especially nothing compared to 2020.
The era of the Women's March, I think, is over.
Oh, do you remember pussy hats? Do you remember?
Oh, better.
I mean, maybe you don't, but like, I'm not going to name here, but I just remember all of these middle-aged boomer women in my hometown. Like, if we're getting all of our pussy hats together and going to San Francisco for a protest, you have your pussy hats. It's like women who were in their 60s. I'm just like,
they're all just too tired, and it's kind of just become pathetic again.
It's the millennials that are tired now.
Yeah,
I mean, of course, boomers are tired. They're in their 60s and 70s, but it's just now the millennials are the millennial activist generation is tired of protesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and if you remember, Dave, because we were both in liberal towns at the time, there was also the 2-week hangover when the most insufferable people in the world were still wearing them. It was.
Yeah, I saw people like around Seattle still had them on. Like, you wearing white after Labor Day? Like, what's going on there?
Exactly. Right? It's like wearing your Christmas
you're wearing
sweater
the
to
pussy
New Year's.
hats and you're wearing the pussy hats and it's April and you're like, okay, man, this is a January thing, right? Okay, Asteroidal Assassin says, I will say that I'm disappointed in the Muslims of Dearborn for electing Trump over Stein or simply not voting. The dude just says that the magic funny words and you forget that he's a Zionist. Is everyone just a sheep? Well, Trump is, Zionism was not on the ballot, Asteroidal Assassin. I hate to say this. This is what kind of frustrates me is that when people vote in elections on issues that aren't on the ballot, like there's the Christian equivalent of this is like Lila Rose, right? She was I knew
Lila Rose, yeah.
It's Lila Rose. Okay, this is a person who's a big deal on the Catholic pro-life community from her arrival on the scene in 2012, and she was organizing like this anti-Trump protest vote because Trump wasn't sufficiently pro-life. Leela, abortion isn't on the ballot. Right? It's not. The government does not put every issue on the ballot just because a candidate speaks words in that direction. It's kind of silly. It's like, I don't know. It's like betting on a football team because the same town has like a really strong basketball team. It's nuts. But anyway, and Zionism was not on the ballot. Both candidates were Zionists. The policy wouldn't have largely changed. I think Trump is the better bet for stopping the war in Gaza, and that's actually something that I really, really hope Trump does. I want him to stop these insane bloodbaths. I can't stand seeing a generation of young men tossed into a meat grinder for neocon blather. Anyway, Asteroidal Assassin again says, Dave, I have bad news. I don't think I'll be taking to that really short girl. Even more bad news that I don't seem to be that I'm not unhappy about it. Did I just lose my soul? Well, doesn't sound like you really liked her to begin with. So, look, if you're not sad about a breakup or it not working out, then it probably wasn't such a good prospect to begin with. once I learned that, then you kind of learn to calm down about dating. It's all these little lessons about dating you learn, and not caring about things not working out is a major step in that direction. If you don't get married, really, at a very young
not
age.
Every woman you date and break up with, you learn pretty fast, is not every single one of them is the one.
And some of them are just bad fits.
Yeah.
Some are just bad fits. There's like that's the modern imagination does not allow for that. It's either like you're the one or you're an asshole, and there's not like this isn't working out.
Well, it's weirdly pathologized too. It's like you have it'll be like, oh, you have a narcissist personality disorder or something like that. Like you can't just not like them. There must be some kind of medicalized reason. You see this anytime single women talk about how their exes need to go to therapy.
Oh, the go to therapy thing. That's just a woman thing, though. This whole therapy, and I'm not going to get into my own relationship, but this whole therapy thing, it's like a default mode for millennial women. Like, oh, therapy really helps. Like, what happens? What do you do? Like, will you just tell the therapist your problems, and they give you like really pedestrian insights, and then you give them a check for $80.
As a fan of The Sopranos, this is ringing a lot of bells. I'm tempted to start quoting Tony Soprano of going, "Yo, I understand psychology as a concept. I've read Freud." But when any of the times I've gone, it hasn't really helped me in any way. What actually helped is going out and doing things like going to church and getting a job.
So I will
exercise
give
too.
An unconventional piece of advice, which is the best way to deal with severe mental illness is to find an online audience and cultivate a sycophantic cult of personality on the internet.
Wow. That does work. It does do great things for your pocketbook. Makes you being crazy actually is an asset for the influencer class.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you can just tell this from, again, I keep going back to like the TikTok videos that seem really dubious as to their sincerity of the women, screaming about Trump winning in this election, because they're really calm. Suspiciously, they're supposed to be crying, but you don't see any tears. They'll very, very calmly set up the camera and then just scream. And, well, hey, women tears get money and I guess move the world.
Well, this is actually something that this is good you mentioned that, right? Because there was this phenomenon of like, this is part of the reason why I just can't do a 2016. Like, this was a big deal when Trump won. Like the leftist meltdown videos, everyone was watching them, but you realize that these are all fake. And like the Boogie 2988 one was the sort of the ne plus ultra of this phenomenon. Boogie's freak out over the Trump victory was so obviously fake. It's so obviously fake. And it's just but you realize that these are all fake. These are all done by drama kids, by girls who are in the drama kid spirit. They like crying, and they like crying on the internet. And all you're doing is sort of like laughing at an entertainment product that was put there for you to laugh at.
Mm-hmm.
Creeper Weirdo says Christian nationalism is still here, and now we know that it's more Doug Wilson and not Nick Fed Fuentes. It's more realistic to adapt now. Well, I mean, this is maybe something that you know a little bit more about, Jay Burton. What's your read on Christian nationalism? It's really more of a Protestant thing at this stage.
It is, and I don't know a lot about it. I'm friends with a lot of people involved in it. Like I like Isker and some of the other guys. But to be honest, it's sort of opaque to me. I don't like it. I have nothing bad to say about all of the guys I know, but everything I see out of, Andrew Wilson, for example, who's, one of the prominent figures in that movement, is incredibly cringe. And so to me, and again, I know I have friends who are a part of this movement, so I'm deeply sorry. It feels like a slightly more radicalized version of the moral majority, like consider it like the moral minority. It's just like, I don't see it having legs.
Yeah, and Andrew Wilson's kind of an interesting character because he has had his moments. There was it debate against Matt Dillahunty where Dillahunty just storms off in rage. So Andrew Wilson essentially is doing the Destiny frame game, but with apologetics.
And that's great. I just don't like it. And
I hate it. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. This is a terrible way for discourse. This is a discourse style that benefits people with no ideas. And when the substance of Christianity is so strong, why would you defer to this kind of Twitch way of talking about things? It was interesting in the fact that he kind of exposed that the second the atheists came in contact with a frame game that they didn't control, because that's what the new atheist movement was. It was a frame game. They immediately just folded. And so like one of the arch debate bros, one of the arch frame game players, the second he caught a whiff of his own medicine, he immediately folded. But after that, like the career of Andrew Wilson is just to kind of do this destiny shtick with ideas that I agree with. I hate it. And furthermore, it's also yet another example of Red America adopting a blue state phenomenon like 5 or 6 years after this phenomenon has reached its peak.
So one thing I do want to say, because I'm being informed by a friend of mine who knows more about this, is that Doug Wilson is a pre-existing guy on the right connected to kind of the homeschool movement. And basically he has been trying to co-opt Christian nationalism. Those are two separate parties currently battling it out. So that's my bad. I'm slightly misstated the battle lines there.
As far as I can tell, Doug Wilson is the real deal. But Doug Wilson also does not need Christian nationalism to be his brand. He's not a nationalist figure. He's a localist figure, which I know that distinction is probably not important to the people who care about Christian nationalism, but that the distinction between localism and nationalism is critical to my understanding of myself as not being a nationalist. So I can't help but put that forward. The second question is like Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes was a big loser from this election. Like he's been catching shit on Twitter, left, right, and center.
The complete flip of him and Charlie Kirk's positions has been something to see. Like Charlie Kirk is vastly more palatable now.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Kirk is in many ways a less organic figure in the sense that he is the creation of these Republican institutions, and he's moved with the institutions. So in that sense, Nick is a much more organic figure, and that Nick organically comes
like
from a certain moment. Yeah. Nick organically, I mean, I'm not the biggest Nick fan in the world. People have known that about me for ages, but Nick organically comes from a certain period of the 2016 internet specifically. But he also has the problems of that. And the problem is that he's irony poisoned. I haven't had a single Nick Fuentes position that wasn't claimed to be a joke. Right. So now all of his followers are claiming that the entire arc of him going hard anti-Trump in the months leading up to the election was a giant joke. That's fine if you're an entertainer like Sam Hyde, but as Nick kind of starts becoming a more established quantity, as he gets, I hate to say it, older, people are less forgiving about like, I was just pretending to be retarded for like the 200th time.
Nick is older than I am, for reference. Like,
I know exactly.
At a certain point, it's like you're not young anymore.
But every age, this is true for a lot of people on the internet, but every age Nick Fuentes will be prefaced by just. When this guy is 54, he's just 54 years old. There'll never be a time when Nick Fuentes' age is not prefaced by the word just. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jay, but like that's just at some point you gotta. Nick is one of the slickest debaters of all time, and he has a gift for words that I can only aspire to. But he's got to do some serious brand management in the next year if he doesn't want to become just another Sam Hyde comedian. Because at this stage I can't tell what his serious positions are anymore.
Well, and this is I think broader in a broader sense a problem with the Zoomer generation, right? Is that this kind of like extreme meta irony where everything is both a joke and not a joke at the same time. And look, I've fully been guilty of that, right? You're talking to the boomer poster extraordinaire.
This is the big difference between the older millennial generation and the Gen Xers and the younger millennial generation and the Zoomers. Is that the younger millennials and the Zoomers like this kind of like, you can't tell if I'm joking or not. And older millennials and Xers hate it.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that is an issue. I will say no more about him.
Astral Assassin says, what are the odds of leftists raiding the Capitol on January 6th? That would kind of be funny if there was an version of that. I mean, it would be super funny, wouldn't it? But it's not going to happen. There's not the energy to make it happen, and it would get smacked down so quickly, right? I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. Again, to use a Trumpism, the left really just feels pretty low energy. They're out of gas that they used. They started with in 2016 and really started exhausting in 2020. Like a bit off, or I mean, related to that is I really feel like this year you kind of saw that they're running out of soft power and had to start resorting to hard power. And now that they're out of power in official, federal government capacity, they're really going to have to do a lot of reorganizing if they want to get power back.
There's no energy. Antifa got turned off. It's going away.
It got turned off, and it's also going to be really hard to turn it back on again.
I am waiting for one of the Chaz people to say, we are standing back and standing by. But I doubt that.
Sam153 says, evening, Dave. This is the election where academic agent was triumphant. The leftist energy levels are amazingly low. Harris was an airhead all along. They let Trump win because they wanted it. 4 years of reprieve until Patrick Bateman of California rears his head. Yeah, it will definitely be Patrick Bateman. For Patrick Bateman is Gavin Newsom. For anyone who's, I almost called him Gavin Bateman. It's just the resemblance is pretty profound. But yeah, we got to use this time, guys. No, there are no laurels to rest on. This is our enemy fumbling the ball. If you don't go after that loose ball, there are a bunch of other people who will. Ben White for $3. Well, I am not calling out the money because it's I can't present the chats on screen. But Ben White says, "Hi, Dave. I was at a watch party with a bunch of based Catholic guys in their early 20s and stayed out until 3 a.m. Very fun time. What do you think about red states who voted to enshrine abortion rights?" Well, okay. I mean, look, abortion. So this is a classic example of something you can't legislate. Maybe Christians don't know this, but the majority of, 99% of sexual culture outside of a few Christian spheres plays by post-sexual revolution rules, which in most cases you sleep together before you're even dating. There's no way that works, and abortion isn't legal, at least for the first trimester, because it just doesn't politically. So if the elite were to say, like, we're going to start unspooling the sexual revolution and going back to an expectation of commitment before sex, then maybe you could change the culture to the point where it would be politically viable to ban abortion. But right now, if we're still a democracy, that's never going to happen. And so, I really think that the pro-life movement has gotten as far as it possibly can. And our focus should be on modeling a healthier sexual culture at this stage. Roe's overturned. That was the really egregious activist decision. That was sort of the legal atrocity. But the atrocity of murdering unborn lives that will be in place as long as we consider sexual liberty to be a right that young people naturally have. And it's a larger plan in spooling that, I guess. Ben White also says, I'm interviewing for jobs currently. It seems that the job market is a little better now than it was earlier this year. Maybe we actually got a soft landing. Please say a prayer for me. Well, we certainly will. Any comment on Ben White's
so I will say, hold on to your britches, Ben, because we may have got a momentary reprieve, but things are probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable in Q1 of next year, just based off my sources. But gentlemen, I'm going to have to head off. Thank you guys so much for having me. It was good to talk to you again, Dave. Obviously, good to talk to you again, Fritz.
All right,
and,
thanks.
Thank you guys so much for hosting me.
Thanks so much, Jay. I'll talk to you later.
Yep. I should probably head out soon as well. I can stay for another couple super chats, though.
Okay, sounds good. And I'll answer them solo. Eric Lafar for $5. You missed the most important difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. No turncoat Chris Christie staffing Trump's administration with Trump's political enemies. Rod Rosenstein, Rance Priebus, Mark Milley, Gina Haspel. I don't know who Gina Haspel is. But yeah, I guess that's a difference. I'm still not super impressed. I mean, like, if he was going whole hog, Elon Musk would be staffing the entire government at this stage. But thank you. Aspiring Misanthrope for a very large super chat. Wow, very, very generous. Thank you. He says, we beseech thee, Almighty God, that thy servant Donald, who through thy mercy has undertaken the government of this realm, may also receive an increase in all virtues, fittingly adorned with those. May be he able to shun all evil doing, vanquish his enemies, and with his family come by the grace under thee, whose art the way, the truth, and the light, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Well,
Amen.
Yeah, it's good to pray for political leaders. I think that that's these kind of sentiments about praying for the guidance of political leaders as being chosen is something that is actually healthy. It's been unjustly maligned in the present era. Gabbingson for $3. Dave, are you familiar with the YouTuber What If All Hist? If so, what are your thoughts on him? I'd love to see the two of you talk. Yeah, I mean, he's a really bright guy. And not to use the Nick Fuentes excuse, he is quite young, so I cut him some slack. He was on a podcast called Dad Saves America, and I really disagreed with some of his takes. And I felt like these are takes the young man would say, who learned most of his stuff through books and needed to be colored by a lot more experience that he did not have. But this is he has more than enough time to learn, and I'm very interested to see what he does in the future. So I'd say, talented guy, but at this stage, he's still kind of ironing out the kinks to his worldview. Do you know What If Alt Hist?
I think only very little. Sorry, I'm not that familiar with him.
Sure, fair enough. Nerve and V-Maker for $15. Oh, I keep on reading it out. Nerve and V-Maker. He says, I know Trump is a serious problem and that federal political form is limited, but Trump has something of the heroic in him. Yeah, he has that monarchical form I mentioned before. No other politician could have made it this comeback with all the obstacles in place. It's honestly remarkable and unprecedented in U.S. history. Well, it's not unprecedented. Abraham Lincoln had this monarchical quality. George Washington did. Huey Long did, FDR did, JFK did, right? And then these people happen. They're rare, but they're by no means historically unprecedented. So, but he is a transformative figure, and JFK could have been transformative had he lived a little bit longer.
Which I suppose we're getting some consolidation now, considering his nephew.
Hopefully there'll be a younger version of him in my lifetime. Michael Fox for $15 says $50 for the boys. Thank you very much. Asteroidal Assassin says, that the left has gotten better at concealing their freakouts and marginally better at making their memes. They may become better at recruiting men into their movements. Don't be alarmed. They may use passing trannies to recruit men. Oh, yeah. They've gotten better at making memes by copying right-wing memes. They've gotten better at concealing their freakouts because they're too tired to freak out. They've exhausted themselves. It's like saying that you have it's like saying that like an out of weight person has restraint by not starting fights. He can't start fights. He's not in shape enough to start fights. So I don't know, Asteroid Lasas, I'm going to have to disagree with you there, but I take your point. And I don't know if you can use passing trannies to recruit young men.
Yes, remember to always be wary of traps.
Trannies are the shock troops of the left, but the trannies that are the shock troops of the left are largely the types that don't pass. They're the autogynephilia types, and the Blair Whites of the world, the kind of, what is it, the Blanchards type 1 transsexuals, the gay men, they usually are entirely apolitical and just want to go with the flow. And people who just go with the flow don't make very good political stalwarts, which is why the left is learning that they cannot organize a political movement around women. They're just not constant enough. Chai Squared says, hello, Dave. An update on the GURPS group. I love GURPS myself, a big Steve Jackson fan. I've actually only played it once, but I like the idea of GURPS so much. I'm not a role-playing guy, that's why. I was inspired by Academia is Women's Work article. Oh, that's a seminal article by John Carter. And the insight into the role that competition plays in getting groups of men to improve. I'm leveraging this to improve all of our fitness goals. I will report back in a few months to how well this works, onward and upward. Yeah, I've thought about this too. So I'm kind of gotten a little bit more into a game called Blood Bowl, which is, it's actually a Games Workshop game that doesn't suck, which is kind of amazing. But people don't actually use Games Workshop's models, which is additionally interesting. And I've speculated, talked to someone like, oh, what if, like, if you crushed your fitness goals, you got like an additional reroll in the game. Like, and if you didn't, the accountability is to lose your rerolls, because you get a certain number of rerolls in the game. So you could totally do creative stuff like that. It's a little cringe to kind of make that a thing on the internet, but for a local group, it could completely work. And not to lean into the gamification of stuff, but any thoughts on using nerd culture to encourage men to be more based or accountable?
I mean, yeah, like it would be, I mean, I know we all got the term LARP, but I'm just now envisioning you doing D&D, but actually incorporating more physicality into it.
Well, there was a little bit of that in the 90s with, there was literal live action. There was this place called the Society for Creative Anachronism that were historical medieval role players. And they had a lot of people that were kind of like proto right wingers in them. It wasn't until the 2000s where these LARPing groups became just avenues for the worst kinds of theater kids. So it's interesting. I mean, I wonder if could that be recaptured? I mean, all of the enthusiasts from medieval history right now are almost entirely right wing. So you know, there's a huge opportunity there. That's something that Basque leading groups should be looking into if you have interested parties in this dimension. Leftist women are sex striking while Trump is in office. That's kind of funny, says Creeper Weirdo. Yes, it's the good old-fashioned female sex strike. It was a subject of a Greek play from 2,000 years ago, and it's never worked. I love how all female feminist strategies right now are some variation of like, we're going to collectively kill ourselves to prove a point. It's just... this is not serious politics. It's not bad politics. It just is not politics. It doesn't even deign to be serious politically.
And it's women that the right wing men they want to punish would have no interest in dating anyways. And
yeah, so they're punishing their own men.
It's also just the feminine kind of idea of I'm just going to take my ball and leave. The same people that say, oh, I'm going to go to Canada or I'm going to leave the country if Trump wins, and they never do.
Well, I'm going to take my bolt and leave, but they have no leverage, right? Like women are able to leverage sex inside monogamous societies where sex is scarce. But every high status man can easily get sex in this environment who does not have a moral implication of it, or maybe you just don't know how it works, right? I mean, so they're trying to leverage a scarce resource that has been rendered non-scarce by their very politics. It's the most pathetic. I mean, I feel sorry for these women, right? I guess I'll say this: women can absolutely destroy civilization. they can absolutely capsize a political movement. They can destroy a politician. They can destroy civilization. They can destroy society. They can burn down their own families. They can destroy their own marriages. But this is non-generative stuff. And sitting on a pile of ashes, you know, flexing at your ability to spread chaos is just not. It's just really pathetic. It will go, and it will be remembered historically as being a pathetic thing. And future generations of women will look back at you and go, you know, what were you thinking? And I don't want that to be my legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Latorno for $3 says, Michael Moore once called a Trump the American voters' Molotov cocktail to the establishment. Your thoughts? Well, I mean, you know, Michael Moore is occasionally based, and when he said that, he was speaking truth. You know, that's how democracy always works. It always is just this unexpressible rage thrown behind one monarchical figure, because if populist energy isn't consolidated into a powerful figure, it essentially is immediately lost. It is immediately dispersed, because populism can't maintain itself in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Chi Squared. When are you doing the statistics stream, Dave? I'm a regular donator who represents the common sentiment of your viewer base and not biased at all. Trust me. Well, somebody spoke to me at the Basque Weaving event and told me he'd be interested in me publishing my stats lectures. I just have no time. I mean, it takes hours to go through a stats course, and I would have to. It would be interesting to make a stats course. Maybe make it one of the foundations of statistics in one of the academic agencies, little thing. But it'll be really fun. And finally, Michael Latornu for $3 USA. Any thoughts on bestiality, Cenk Unger's current behavior? I think he'll go the way of Anna Kasparian. I don't know. I assume Cenk had a meltdown. I don't know what his bestiality thing is.
Yeah, and I'd rather not know about that. His meltdown was kind of a similar thing to his 2016 meltdown, where he was just blaming, somewhat rightly, the Democratic donor class of, you know, being completely incompetent and all of that. And, you know, I feel like from his perspective as a leftist, yeah, he's right. That they decided to run this campaign of a clearly unqualified, incompetent idiot. But yeah, it's entertaining. I'm not sure because a number of the people of the Young Turks have kind of already left. I don't know if Anna Kasparian is going to be next, because then, you know, the original, I guess, traitor was Dave Rubin, and then I think Jimmy Dore's kind of gone off of there, has kind of left that as well.
I see Zed Dez in the chat complaining about hatred of women. I mean, I think women are a very valuable role to play in politics, but I don't see coalitions of women's interests as being stable politically. I think that this is just a wrong avenue. I think women have roles as artists and potentially queens and aristocrats and organizers, and you should always be nice to women. This is one thing I told people. Don't gloat to your family, to your friends, and don't gloat especially to the women family members. No triumphalism. Only direct triumphalism against public figures that are in the idea sphere to begin with. This is just plain noblesse oblige, and you need to be nice to women. But being nice to women, and certainly the women in my own life, I try to make a point of that. My wife can tell me how good I am at doing that. But this does not mean that I have to respect a sex strike where the plan is to completely sabotage the civilization that gives these women the comfortable existences that they depend on. That is rightfully laughed at. And once you realize that certain variations are just, that's essentially what a certain kind of woman likes doing. And I very much include figures here like Radham Hitler. Once you realize that this is sort of a pattern of behavior, you just realize that this has to be fundamentally disrespected. This kind of like, we're going to screw us all over, and then you'll be sorry because we'll all be fucked. Like that kind of attitude coming from women, what can I say? It needs to be laughed at, because it's if I entertain that, it will be the death of all of us. And so people need to realize that this is not a acceptable way to play politics. If you're a woman, you deserve honor and respect and political power to the extent that you can responsibly wield it individually. But none of this coalition politics where genders are political groups that need to be respected because they control the supply of female sexual favors. That is insane.
Yeah, and I was going to say that just in general, that kind of I guess female attitude towards politics is just the same people though be oh yes queen is actual famous queens in history did not act like this or had any. This is not how they approached their rulership. Maria Theresa did not act like this. Isabella of Castile did not act like this.
And if you're worried that I don't treat my wife well, she gets to spend all the super chat money, and you guys have been very, very generous. So all your donations don't go to me. They go to her, and she spends the money. I just sit here in front of my computer, either doing my boring remote workaday job or writing essays or doing podcasts. She interacts with the outside world like spending money. So,
yeah, so if that isn't political
power, then I guess I manage investments. So there's that, right? I manage the business side of things, but spending all of the money in your household is very much political power, and I assure you, she wields it. Last chat of the night, Michael Latorno. Thank you very much, Michael. I think we've spoken online. Any thoughts on? Wait, no, I just read that one. That's the Schenk Uyghur tweet. Okay, well, guys, I think that's the podcast for tonight. Thank you for joining me, Fritz, and. Maybe we'll chat in the future about more specific cultural matters. I'm thinking of. I think your job to think of that because I'm way too swamped with all of the stuff that I'm doing.
Yeah, I didn't really get to it as much as I'd want to tonight, but yeah, I'm gonna see if I can get Hunger on to stream with me so we can talk about the Pennsylvania OGC meetup because that was quite good and it was quite the workout for me. I think that was the one mistake that might have been made is that we all walked for 5.5 miles. So we were kind of all too tired afterwards to really engage in much discussion, but we did a lot during it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well,
thank you for having me on.
Sounds good, guys. It was a great election week this week. And I hope to be with you guys going forward into this new era we occupy. Have a good evening and a blessed rest of the week.
Mm-hmm.